good fortune of being a student at Bethany Theological Seminary from 1966 to 1970. That was the era, some people might say the heyday, of the bright young faculty, of which Dale and Bob were both members. Now, a lot has happened in the years since then in the church, and Dale and Bob have been a part of many of those events. Dale as a professor, a theologian, church historian, and moderator, and Bob as general secretary and as president of Juniata College. And now Dale has written another book called Another Way of Living. Excuse me, Another Way of Believing.
Living comes next.
Living comes next. I knew I was going to get that wrong. That tagline is out there.
It's so central.
And Bob's been invited to interview Dale and challenge him and engage him in a lively discussion of the ideas in the book. So it's my privilege to introduce these two men who are no longer faculty and no longer young, but they are still bright. So I give you Dale Brown and Bob Neff.
Yeah. Is this on?
Is this on? Oh, yeah, it's on.
Okay, I want to be on too.
Yeah, Dale's worried he won't get in a word edgewise. The other, I thought I was putting Dale on the left and me on the right, but he's on your right and I'm on your left, so it's very confusing at this stage of your life which side you're really on. My task is not so much to challenge, but to give you a chance to hear Dale's view in a very beautifully written book, Another Way of Believing, but it could just as well have been titled Another Way of Living. And I actually got a chance to read the final copy before Dale had to think, and so it's my pleasure to ask questions on your behalf as to the nature of the book. Actually, the first paragraph of the book starts off with a Lutheran proclaiming that brethren have a religion without any clothes. And then, meaning that we don't really have a theology. And then you proceed to write a book on brethren theology, the clothes of the church. And how do you define theology, Dale?
Wow, that's more than one question. No, I've been waiting so long for this. I'm going to just tell the story. It comes from the faculty. A faculty meeting that we had, he was really passionately on one side of an issue, and I forget the issue. And I was on the
So
other.
do I.
And I was on the other side of the issue. And then we left. And that evening at home, I got to thinking, well, you know, I think Neff was right for one time. And so I was all prepared for the next faculty member to kind of meeting to confess that I was wrong, he was right. But immediately he said, but I've changed my mind.
It's a true story. Back to the question.
Oh, yes.
See, he's trying to divert me. This is going to be very tough. How does a brethren person define theology, Dale?
Yeah, well, it was really great to have students like that in Chicago that just came in and they didn't know anything about us, but they wanted to know more. And for her, a Lutheran, the creeds are the clothes. I mean, they really liked the creeds, and they did when the brothers started. And that's when we refused in the beginning. Well, then we were in jail for that. And so, now our close, that's her close, our close, and that's your basic question. Our close is what I feel very strongly, and this is the kind of the crux of the whole book, that we do not have a propositional theology, but that we have a relational theology. And so we do believe something. It makes a difference, you know, how we treat each other and how we relate to God, how we relate to Jesus. Those things are very important, but we have a relational theology. And the thing that helped me a whole lot was to look at two brethren cards, and one of them was not new to me. I mean, I didn't know about it before the book. But the first brethren card that I was acquainted with came out of the fundamentalist movement. And in 1926, that card, which has, you know, the propositionals, you know, the virgin birth, the inerrancy of the Bible, is a whole lot of it. That creed, then, well, that, oh yeah, 19, I'll get aboard here. Okay. Forgive me. Let me say something about the other creed that was discovered by Carl Bowman. And his creed comes before. It's an older creed than this fundamentalist creed. And I really was surprised and about this creed, because it begins this way, you know, we are little children, and that's who we are as brethren, we're little children. But then it goes on to say, we teach all of the doctrines of Christ. And what are they? Love, peace, unity, faith, and works.
And I thought, as I was reading that section, because we've often thought of the Brethren card as a series of creedal statements, they were really, the first card was a set of relationships, and which is really fundamental to your book, that when we do theology, we do it relationally, and that comes through the whole book. But one of the other issues that arises is this issue of, are we Anabaptists or Pietists? And I know we could go all morning on that particular question, but how do you see the Anabaptist side of us or the Pietist side of us?
Well, I'll make it short. I'll just say one word for pietism, and that's love. I'll say one word for Anabaptism, and that's discipleship. And I think Roberta Elder, he said these were in tension, but Carl Bowman came along, and I agree with Carl very much, that these are mutually reinforcing, and it's good to have them both.
You might say a further comment, Dale. How are they mutually reinforcing? Because that's clearly a whole discussion point of the chapter on Anabaptism and Pietism.
Well, they're both extremely ethical, you might say, anything related to the brethren. You know, is how you work out the faith. And for pietism is sanctification and all of that, the new work, the new walk. And for Anabaptism is obeying the commandments of Jesus.
So I think one of the interesting things in the book is the way in which these streams are really feeding and defining one another, and I found it a very, very helpful chapter. Now, one of the most surprising chapters I read was on the sacraments, and I wasn't even sure that we had sacraments, so I always thought of ordinances or something like that. You might share your view. Are we asacramental, anti-sacramental, or are we really sacramental?
Oh, that I could take so long on that.
I'm not going to let you take so long on that, but
But I'm not, no. I'll just take your question. I am anti-sacramental if it's magical. you know, if that bread is just turns into the flesh of Christ. The magical part of that, I'm anti. But the word sacrament means mystery. And there's a lot of mystery to the faith. You know, you just take the doctrine of the church, which we probably won't talk about, but the doctrine of
There is a chapter, by the way, on the doctrine of the church.
It says the church is a human institution, but it's a divine institution. Well, how can it be a divine institution and a human institution with people like you and me? How it could be both? That's a mystery. That's a mystery. And Vatican II, they listed that as one of the sacraments. And that set my mind to thinking that when I got to a discussion with other theologians one time in a small group, that we each had to tell our, definition of sacraments and the like. For the first time, instead of being anti-sacrament, because of In Place of Sacraments, which was a great book by Bernard Elder, I said, I think our tradition is more sacramental. And that blew their mind, except the Orthodox man. He really liked that. He said, I want you to come and tell my people. The Episcopalian said, you two are not nearly as close together as you are pretending to be. But, let me illustrate it with, say, the communion. The presence of Christ, that's a part of communion. That's the mystery. To have the presence of Christ amongst us and the Spirit of Christ, that's a mystery. And that's what we have. When Jesus says, this is my body, or what?
This is my body, which is
This
broken.
is my body. The New Testament scholars, who they're in small minority, but they say that could easily be translated and be maybe more accurate. That Jesus is saying, you are my body as you break bread together. You are my body. And so that that gives a sacramental nature, because for brethren, all of life is a sacrament. And the reason I said more sacramental is that they put this in a cage. It can only be one way in the church. And we say that what we do there can also be a part of life beyond the church. And because, we have a Bible verse for it, and wherever two or three are gathered in the name of Jesus, there Jesus is.
It's a very powerful chapter, and I've always been taught that we have, at best, two sacraments, and you go into the issue of 2:7 and conclude this chapter on saying that all of life is a sacrament. It's a very, very powerful chapter, a very, very interesting chapter. Now, one of the things that we are very much aware of in the life of the church is the kind of issues of unity and dissension. And Dale, you might talk about your discoveries in dealing with church conflict. And there's a whole chapter on conflict, and you might share your discoveries.
All through history, it was really, I have so many illustrations there, but I'll just use a few. All through history, we had conflict and differences. But the one thing that saved the brethren is that they had consensus for so long. And when you have consensus, you can't have just a narrow vote if you're divided. You have to have everybody with you. And so that kept a lot of these issues. Well, they kept the issues, but then they didn't define them. And we start with Catherine Hummer. I see the person over here who's resurrecting now, Catherine.
There's a big smile on his face.
And they would have a play down, and of course she had all kinds of visions and the like, and her father was an elder, and they went around all of Pennsylvania sharing that, and that produced a lot of criticism and conflict. And so the first annual conference that dealt with differences, what did they say? They said, well, you know, we all should have more patience with each other. And long suffering and patience. And so they recommended that, and they recommended to both sides, the other side, they recommended to her father, that don't do this as much as you've been doing it, you know. But you know, they didn't say no. Another one was universal restoration of all souls. You know, eventually everybody's going to be saved. God, if we have a God of love, why eventually everybody's going to be saved. Well, they differed on that, and there are different variations of that, but there were a lot of differences. And it came to conference again and again and again, but the conference always had decisions that didn't prove, you know, say one side was right and the other side was wrong. They had evaded that. And they ended up, their last decision was, well, if we're going to fight about that so much, let's quit reading these books. And so, but the other side of this is, I think the brethren have looked really bad when they've been dogmatic and they've really been disciplined. And the first one was a hacker affair, and that was in Europe before they came to it. And they lost 100 members because they kicked a young man out of the church for marrying a Mennonite.
Oh.
And so, but you know, it's the liberal part of that debate in Europe that came to America first. And so, Mennonites and brethren did marry a lot. That's why we have a lot of those crazy names that we have.
Well, what I want to underscore here is that often we think of theology as some dry book somewhere. What I love about this book is what Dale's just demonstrated, anecdote after anecdote after anecdote. We live in a day of narrative, and Dale has done it beautifully. And we could go more in this chapter because you deal with the biblical authority issues and other papers in recent history which are dealt with just as well. But we all have a time frame, so I want to keep us moving through this book because whether you realize it or not, we are about halfway through the book. It's like everything else, you may have to lay it down before you finish it. But one of the issues is the way where we're coming up to the 300th anniversary, Dale, of the Brethren. And you speak of existing differences of these various bodies in your book. You also say that the Church of the Brethren is more relational than doctrinal. Is that more true of the Church of the Brethren than the other brethren bodies?
Oh yeah, that's a good question because I think the progressive brethren, they wanted to, you know, give up the dress and give up a lot of they wanted pastors, they didn't want just the free ministers and so forth. And they wanted to move away and be progressive, but in moving away, they at first were very liberal, but then now they turned to the fundamentalist movement, really. And I can illustrate it by, we had theological conferences all through the 60s, and at one of those, you had to be way out, you know, in the Brethren Action Movement or someplace to be invited. But we invited a member of the progressive church to be there. And about the second or third day, we asked him to give his impressions of us. And he said, you brother, when you came together, you had so many differences. You know, you had so many differences. But you all acted like you were happy to see each other. You were really happy. He says, now it's not that way with us. He said, we all have to believe the same thing. But when we come together, we're not that happy to see each other. The other side of that, the old order, I think that they're sort of with us, except they freeze. You know, like not wearing a tie, or a lot of things they just freeze and want to maintain. Whereas we have the freedom, you know, to not wear a tie or to wear a tie when my spouse makes me.
Neither one of us are going there. As the book progresses, Dale heightens one of his major interests, which is the peace witness of the church, and I think it would not be fair to this conversation, and I'll phrase the question this way. You state that many congregations fail to proclaim our peace witness, Dale, for fear of losing members. Can we do this and still be brethren?
Yes. Well, next to the last chapter, chapter 13, I try to make the case that we are still a peace church. And I do that in different ways, but I could go into that. But I believe that we also, because of who we are, we give freedom to people who do not always follow annual conference decisions. We've given it to BRF, and I don't know that I met a Brethren pastor. He wanted me to stay up almost all night because he hadn't ever told this story to anyone, but he was a Mennonite. And the Mennonites, when the war came along, World War II, the Mennonites then, the elders, they told him where he was going to go in alternative service. They had it all worked out.
I think, Dale, I like you talking with me, my eye contact, but I think you may not be hearing Dale when he turns away, so he would do that.
I want to see my brother down here anyway. Well, okay, I think this is a great story where we are today, and that is that he got angry because they didn't include him, and so he joined the Marines, and he wasn't Marines very long before he knew he was in the wrong place, because at night they would come and do everything, step on his toes when he was crawling and the like. They do everything to make you a fighting animal. That's what they're about. And so he knew he wasn't in the right place, but the war ended, and he returned. He joined the Church of the Brethren because the Church of the Brethren is a peace church that has a peace position, but they don't coerce it on you. You know, they do give freedom. And so that's why then he came to Bethany and became a brother pastor. I think that's about where we are today. But I'll say more about that in the next chapter.
Yeah, I think that the last chapter, Dale does not end on chapter 13. He ends on chapter 14, fortunately, and chapter 14 is whither brethren, and I guess that's a good way to conclude the discussion. And what I would like to do here is give the audience about 5 minutes of question time, if I understand our time frame correctly, and that'll give you a chance to interact with the author. But my last question to you, Dale, is really the theme of the 14th chapter, which is whither. I think the title is Whither Brethren.
Yeah. Well, I stress very much that there's really no excuse for us to exist if we are not a peace church. And because a lot of other people have said that the only reason you have to exist as a separate denomination is that you're a peace church. But I want to, well, there's too many things I can say about that. I want to connect it with this conference too, in terms of whether brethren. And that is that when we talk about Jesus, that we are in the sense of judging whether we're successful by how many people we get and whether we're getting a whole lot of people. I don't think that's where I want to grow. I want to convert other people to be brethren, but that's not the basic. The basic is to be faithful to our heritage, to be faithful to who we are as brethren. And we might lose members sometimes over that, or we might gain a lot if we were really faithful to our heritage.
That's a wonderful way to conclude this part of the interview. And I must say, it's a delightful read. And I encourage you to buy the book because it's a reasonable price. It's written by a great author, and it's very interesting read, not what you'd normally expect under the title of theology. So here's a chance for some of you to raise a question with the author, which I thought was only fair. And we have 5 minutes for this segment, so let your questions be brief. Anyone? Yes?
How would you then answer those who might say that we need to look to the megachurches, see what they're doing right, and see what we then need to do to pattern ourselves after them, and reconcile that with what you just said, which I believe wholeheartedly, that we are at heart a peace church and need to continue to be faithful to that. My belief is whether or not we are successful in the world's terms, we are called to be faithful to that.
Yeah. Well, I've never been impressed with Madison Avenue techniques in terms of doing what is successful and what other people are doing. And I think we should do what we're best at doing and trying to love and minister to other people and to love our enemies. That's really a charge. But and that will not always be successful. And I like John Harry Yoder's definition of the cross. It's not a soft cross, but it's the price we pay for our nonconformity to the world.
You know, I can't think of a better way to end than that response, Dale. I mean, it would. I committed to other questions. So, you like an amen. I think we should all say amen to that. Other questions.
I have some thanks that I'd like to give. That they don't make even the pages of the book, but Tom Kinsey, he does get in the book, and he's a Roman Catholic now, and we have Nancy Clem, a Lutheran, and they understand the brother better than most brethren, and really the editors, really they clean up the book. I mean, they make it look really great. I mean, no. And I really want to thank the editors, and I do thank you. I thank my family, and it's wonderful to have had my family here tonight.
If you want to know why I'm going to ask any rough questions, we ought to ask the whole family to stand up. They're in the majority here. The Brown family should stand up.
I want to say that my brother, who just stood way down there, he's always supported me from a distance.
Yes, please.
Brother Dale, your name came up in conversation last night in regard to the idea of Brethren's simple living. Any advice or thoughts on where the church is now with, in a world of acquisitions, what we should be doing or doing better?
Yeah. Well, there's voices that are better, far better than mine. I want my voice to be that way. But I think David Radcliffe is really a voice for the church. And I, you know, I want to say this about your question, and that is that at one time, I don't know if it was when you were top or bottom at Elgin, but but
This was to be polite.
no, but the brother didn't know what they believed, so they had to hire
Oh, my.
consultants to come in to tell us. Well, you know, they did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And, you know, peacefully, simply, together.
I think I've gotten a signal from the person who's in charge, so I thank you, Dale. Thank you for writing a wonderful book and for being so open to discuss it here. Thanks very much indeed.
And thank you.
Well, we would like to thank you very much, Dale. That was just a wonderful, wonderful interview. Thank you.